Hello everyone and welcome. Welcome to this ocean front where land meets water, where reality meets fiction, where humans and nature are not separated. In essence, where anything can happen. My name is Gummi and I will be your captain today along with my crew. Yeah. Now, we are about to take off, but before we do, when it comes to boating, safety is paramount. So, here are some boating safety guidelines and regulations we have to go through. Number 1, safety equipment. Ensure that your boat is equipped with required boating equipment, such as a sound-producing device. Very loud, very good. Number 2, stay updated on weather forecasts and be aware of changing weather conditions. Number 3, properly functioning navigation lights are crucial, especially when boating at night. And last but not least, number 4, life jackets. Ensure that there are enough appropriately sized life jackets or personal flotation devices on board for all passengers. To ensure the best experience here today, please use your mobile phones, but keep them on silent. And be aware that lights from mobile phones can disturb other passengers. I would like to ask you to be fully present with us here for the next 3 hours. Now, we've got some really amazing people joining us here today, people with ideas and new perspectives on how to help the ocean. And if it gets a little bit unsettled up here, we might need to dive down and explore what's going on beneath the surface. But don't you worry, I'm a licensed diver and I will take care of you. So, are you ready? I said, are you ready? Great, because we have our first visitors arriving and they are actually locals. Give a warm welcome to Margrét, Áslaug and Davíð. Come on, boys.
Hey, so good morning. It's really cool to be with you guys. You know, we're in Iceland. It's in the middle of the ocean, and everything we do here is somehow affected by, controlled by the ocean. So it's maybe easy for us to remember that, but of course the whole world is regulated by the ocean, the atmosphere and the weather patterns and everything. And yeah, it's pretty scary that we've been fucking with the system quite badly. And you know, in Iceland we see this very clearly with the global warming, which is very real here. And you know, we have moments where we feel it might be kind of nice. You know, we see the different fish are moving north. And I was discussing this with a friend yesterday, and he pointed out the scary fact that as you know, all these kind of fish are moving north, we're running out of north. So anyway, so we're up here in the north. Iceland is a pretty interesting platform to work from. And well, you know, I'm here with Áslaug, who is one of the main ministers here. We should maybe introduce ourselves. Do you want to say a few words, Áslaug?
Yes, so I'm the Minister of Innovation, Science, Tech, everything we need to tackle this climate crisis. I have the most excited portfolio in the government, definitely. And I'm glad to be introduced as one of the main ministers. I think that's good. But I'm also a fisherman, former fisherman, so I'm
Tell
used,
us
I'm
about
used
that.
to this stuff.
Yeah. How was it? How was it that you became a fisherman?
It was amazing.
H-
Yeah.
How did it happen?
I was just on a waiting list to go.
This is anything in Iceland? A waiting list?
Yeah, and then I got a spot when the people on the boat wanted to party in the Westman Islands one weekend in the summertime. So I got a free spot, so I went for a week to fish mackerel in the Sea of Greenland. So it was a good experience, and yeah, I don't know how it is useful for my job today, but it is.
No, it must be. It must be because you saw the thing, kind of itself.
Yeah, definitely.
No, and then we
Margaret.
have Makas also.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Margaret or Maka. So I'm with Transition Labs. So some of you were here maybe last year when David and Kjartan launched the Transition Labs kind of concept, kind of leveraging Iceland to become a place to provide data points for climate tech companies that need to scale globally. Because when you're a climate tech company, you're working with hardware, you're working with the real world, you're working with nature-based solutions. And these types of things can take a while, let me tell you, many years. But in Iceland, we have so many assets, we'll come back to that later, that can help all these companies on their journey. And Transition Labs is partnering with the highest impact climate tech companies all over the world to help using Iceland as the lever for their global path.
Iceland has some really interesting natural and societal service, I'd say, that work really well for some of the companies that have come here. Iceland, of course, is kind of getting known as a hub for DAC companies, mainly because we have green energy and a place to put the CO2 that gets captured down. But there's other interesting kind of ways we can help. You maybe want to say a few things about how we sort of try to help the companies that are coming here and provide a great environment?
Yeah, I think Iceland has so many potential to be, and we see that to have an environment that these companies could flourish, not only where we are located in the world and our green energy, but also our research and science and our expertise that comes along with, of course, our strong economy and fisheries and our lifelong learning with the sea, but as well as we have the more shorter communication routes, and we have now quite strong ecosystem and agile innovation ecosystem, and we are seeing all of these companies coming to Iceland or being built up in Iceland, that we are punching way beyond our weight. So I believe that our system and what we have to offer can be quite great also to test for piloting solutions, testing solutions out, meet the hindrances before and try it out in Iceland before scaling in the world. And it's one thing that, of course, Icelandic entrepreneurs and people here need to think globally from day one. Because we are so small. So, and that mindset and our mindset on that everything is possible, þetta reddast, we say, I didn't realize how important it is for the entrepreneurs and the science thinking, because when I was in Singapore a couple of months ago, I was trying to learn from them because they think way ahead, longer than a term of a politician, and I was like, I can learn something here and from the universities there as well. But they really envy us on our thinking and how we are not afraid to just try things out and go for it. So that's something we also have alongside with everything else.
Yeah, and if I might add, I think that reddest mentality is really important because when you're in building new stuff, new technology, new markets, new everything, regulations and other things are not really prepared for this. So what we found after having operated in Iceland for now 1.5 years is that the fast feedback loop within the Icelandic system, both for technology and business development, and in particular business development with regulations and discussion, is extremely valuable to advance and accelerate this journey. And because we're talking about the ocean, I think it's very important to note that Iceland to take this for granted, but I don't think this is the case all around the world, actually, that we have for decades talked about sustainability. All the stakeholders have talked about sustainability together. We have the experience from the maritime sector because we actually kind of killed the ocean for a moment where we were like, no, okay, we need to stop now. We need to, everyone talk together, find a mutual solution and move forward, adjust regulation, businesses to take note of the scientific data, etc. This has been ongoing for decades in the maritime sector. So there's nothing new in Iceland with regulators talking to scientists, talking to business, talking to public people. So I think for climate change and developing climate tech companies in Iceland, this is an essential part to adjust all regulations and moving forward fast.
Yeah, I think also the commitment of the government on supporting climate tech, climate solutions, the innovation environment, science will be and is greatly important for companies that are here or want to come to Iceland to build up and pilot their solutions, as well as politicians can't only, it isn't enough to just raise taxes and put on more regulations in the green field. We really need to build the environment so the tech, the science,
Exactly.
the solutions, they really flourish.
Yeah, this is a very, very small country, and sometimes I say, kind of to be provocative, that all the emissions that happen from Iceland, CO2 emissions and other emissions, will matter like nothing to the history of the world. But if we can provide a platform to accelerate some solutions and innovate and then export them to the rest of the world, we might be able to help a little bit.
Yes. What have you seen from the companies that are coming through transition labs? What do they see in Iceland?
As an Icelander, it's fun actually because I've lived abroad a lot of my life. I was in pure software, not thinking about any physical stuff at all. And then I came here. I moved back a couple of years ago, and had this realization that people are coming here because there's a lot of expertise in the maritime sector, it's been said to me by several people that Iceland has the best run fisheries in the world. It's almost embarrassing. I have a hard time saying it because I can't really. Anyway, very smart people have told me this. No, it's hard to think that you're from a place that it might be best at something, and then the fact that you guys, the politicians are so fast moving and so kind of ambitious about these things. And then Iceland has interesting natural resources, from the basalt rock to the green energy, the industrial heat, which is quite plentiful and it can be useful for a lot of processes, to the fact that we have an open system. People can move here from pretty much everywhere in the world, and we have had a lot of researchers, technologists move here recently to work on these projects. So yeah, these are things that weren't obvious to me. But it's been very, very awesome to see how Iceland can serve as a hub, also just in the middle of, between Europe and the US.
Yeah, definitely, and how we have, of course, invested in the fisheries with a more sustainable way, and how we are utilizing our resources, using 90% of the fish. All of this learning and what comes from this inside our university, in our knowledge based, even though we are small and we need more manpower, more expertise as well, we are really good at things that could be is useful. We are seeing it already happening, very useful for piloting some solutions in this field especially.
Yeah, and I would like to, because we've been talking about progress and acceleration, etc. And I mentioned that Transition Labs is only 1.5 years old, but I would like to share some of the progress and some of the projects we're working on at the moment to get kind of sense that things are actually happening and there are a lot of exciting talent out there. So just to back up a little bit for those that don't know, so we at Transition Labs, we saw that there's so many talented teams and entrepreneurs all over the world. We really didn't want to establish our own climate tech company. We thought we could better partner up with them. And the IPCC is always talking about all hands on deck. We need all the solutions we can get, and we need them actually yesterday. So we decided we're sector agnostic. So even though DAC is a good technology to deploy in Iceland, there are many others. So we're working with, for example, Rockport, a Norwegian company that's developed a method and technology to take glass and concrete or construction waste and turn it into circular environmentally friendly building aggregates that can be used for concrete or turf, artificial turf, etc. We're also working with tech companies, such as Noia, that's aiming to do their pilot here in Iceland, and we're helping them figure that out. Another company that's not taking CO2 from the air directly, but using the ocean is Carbon. So a similar, trying to make a pilot in Iceland so that the blueprint can be used for global growth. And because we were mentioning the Icelandic government, having also a trustworthy government and good regulation makes it a credible blueprint. So any pilot anywhere in the world is not essentially as credible as can be in Iceland. So that's a plus as well. We also have launched and secured all permits for Running Tide, our partner. And they have like this smart and simple solution promoting ocean health using macroalgae and ocean alkalinity enhancement. And now they have like a 30,000 square meter industrial plot near the harbor in Grundartangi. They have a large research facility in Akranes where they're like growing their algae spores, and they're developing huge instrumentation and data modeling to do their field experiments at scale in the real world. So that's done, and we're working on others. But we're also working with international research projects that are trying to combat ocean acidification, because the ocean is really important to us here in Iceland. And then actually we were discussing like other assets like land, because in these projects we are always working with municipalities. We have a good working relationship with them. We're looking into actually turning the landfill in Reykjavik City into an eco park with some partners. So that'll be an interesting thing to do, possibly. And we have 51 hectares of land up in Akranes as well, 40 minutes from Reykjavik for non-locals, where we are planning to do like a climate park. It's a new term. We've heard circular parks, we've heard eco parks, green industrial parks, but those usually are always around the by-streams themselves. But climate park could be like a symbiosis of climate companies with as little waste as possible, but of course synergies in utilizing assets, etc. So a lot of exciting stuff going on with only 1.5 years in, and we've grown the team and we're going strong. So if there are any great climate tech founders or teams out there that want to have a chat, just grab us on the coffee break.
Wonderful. Any last words? I think we're running out of time.
We are running out of time. Yeah, it has been wonderful to work with Transition Lab and see what have happened over the last months. And I think these companies are showing us how important it is to have an environment that they can test their solutions. And this is, I think, a field that we can even do much better in. We have seen that from working with you. So I'm just looking forward on working on that and building even better environmental system for the innovation sector and the science.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mata. Thanks, Áslaug. Thanks
you,
for being
everyone.
here. Next up is Brad, who is amazing, by the way.
Bye.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brad Ack. I lead an organization dedicated to creating a new agenda for ocean and climate action. And we need a new agenda because the current agenda is failing. We have to face some hard realities as we look ahead and try to preserve this amazing planet that we live on and that we're so get so many gifts from. We have to, if we're going to tackle the problem, we have to accept just how deep the problem is and how the current agenda is not working. We just heard from the previous panel, there's a lot of new ideas percolating around different parts of an additional agenda. And I want to talk about some of those in detail. But first I want to substantiate my point that the agenda isn't working. I've spent my entire career, which is a long time now, more than I care to admit, trying to preserve the natural world. And basically, we have not succeeded. Every particular system that I've worked on we've seen deteriorate. All of the indications of biological diversity, of ecological function, of abundance on the planet are all going in the wrong direction. So we have to do something different than what we're doing. Continuing to try the same thing over and over with no results is madness. So let me talk a little bit about why the ocean is so important and why the ocean crisis and the climate crisis are intertwined. The ocean has essentially shielded humanity from the worst effects of climate change to date. It's done that in two big ways. First, it has absorbed the lion's share, 93% of all of the excess heat that we're trapping on the planet. And it has done so at great cost, and the heat is enormous. So every year now, we're trapping about 14 zettajoules of heat, excess heat that otherwise would have been reflected back into space. And that, a zettajoule is a joule basic unit of energy followed by 23 zeros. It's an enormous amount of heat. It's the equivalent going into the ocean of 7 atomic bombs of heat energy into the ocean every second. Every second of every minute, every hour, every day, that's how much heat we're driving into the ocean. And that's why we see the unraveling of Earth systems, like Arctic sea ice, as an example. The title of this conference is Bye. We're saying goodbye to things that we care about because of this massive amount of heat that we're trapping on the planet. That heat will continue to be trapped until such time as atmospheric CO2 goes down, and that concentrations of atmospheric CO2 go down. And we're not on a path to do that. We're on a path to keep those concentrations rising. The goal of net zero by 2050, I'm sure many of you have heard that goal, maybe all of you. How many of you think that that's a better place than we are today? Good, I didn't hear anybody say yes. It's a worse place, right? Net zero by 2050 implies a continuing pollution of carbon into the environment, into the atmosphere, a higher concentration in the atmosphere, more heat trapped on the planet, more effect on the oceans. The second big effect of climate disruption is that an enormous amount of our CO2 pollution is going into the ocean and causing ocean acidification. So these two big effects are unraveling ocean systems as we know them, and they will not turn off, full stop, until we bring atmospheric CO2 down. So the current climate agenda is to reduce emissions. Critical. We have to do that. We have to zero them out, but it's no longer enough. We have to add 2 additional components, 2 R's to make this easy. Remove and repair. So the new climate agenda has 3 R's: reduce, remove, repair. Reduce is what we're working on. How do we get carbon out of our lifestyle, out of our economy, our buildings, our food, our energy, our transportation? We need 1,000 shots on goal, every possible application of innovation and technology to do that. The ocean has an enormous role to play. It can provide zero carbon food, it can provide zero carbon transportation, and it can provide zero carbon energy. But we have to get after it in a big way. That's reduce. That's what the world's working on. Remove is pollution cleanup. We have to clean up a massive amount of CO2 pollution that's in the atmosphere and in the upper layer of the ocean, where it will persist for a very long time if we don't clean it up, and it will continue to do damage. So even if we were to stop emitting tomorrow, the damage would continue for 1,000 years or more, just because of the lifetime of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we have to remove. You heard mention of 2 companies, Ebb Carbon and Running Tide, that Transition Labs is working with. They are carbon removal companies. We need thousands of carbon removal companies. We need a new innovation sector in carbon removal. We need a new giant economy in carbon removal, because we have to remove somewhere between 100 and 1,000 gigatons of carbon by the end of this century just to have a chance of that 1.5 target. And that is a lot of carbon. If we want to actually restore our climate and restore the planet, we're going to have to do much better, and we're going to have to clean up the entire mess, right? Just like we learned in kindergarten, clean up your mess. We've got to clean up this giant mess that we have created in the atmosphere that's trapping all of this heat, and we have to do it fast. And it's going to take innovation, and I love the leadership that Iceland is showing in creating spaces for that innovation to happen, and that research and development and testing, and ultimately scaling. The third R is repair. It won't be enough to slowly reduce carbon emissions and clean up carbon if we lose the patient, if we keep saying goodbye to glaciers, if we say goodbye to sea ice, to the permafrost, to the Greenland ice sheet. We won't be able to live well on the planet, certainly not 9 billion of us. So there are critical parts of the global system, many of which are in the marine environment, that are moving faster and tipping at a faster rate than the global average. The name of this conference is an exact example. The cryosphere, the glaciers on our planet, are one of the things that are disappearing fastest. Sea ice, which is the global refrigerator, if you will. It keeps the planet weather system stable. Its loss is disrupting weather across the entire planet. Many of you probably know that the extent of Arctic sea ice affects the monsoons in India, which are responsible for feeding hundreds of millions of people, just as an example. So these critical systems, they're like the vital organs of our body. We won't live well if we don't keep the vital organs alive. And so marine repair is all about interventions to keep the critical parts of the system alive. How can we slow down the loss of sea ice, the loss of glaciers? How can we slow down the thawing of the permafrost, which threatens to release enormous greenhouse gas? How can we slow the rate of melt of the Greenland ice sheet, which is affecting the North Atlantic current? These are the questions of the future. These are the questions that people will be wrestling with for the next century on this planet. It's going to require a radically different approach. The current approach we have is incremental, and the change is exponential. So we're trying to beat an exponential problem with incremental action, and that is a recipe for failure. So we have to apply what we have at our disposal. The good news is we have more knowledge, more technology, more tools than we've ever had in the history of humanity, whether it be AI, robotics, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and many more. These are the kinds of tools that we're going to have to bring to these really large problems. And places like Iceland and the innovation ecosystem that you're building here are perfect places to advance these kinds of, the development of these technologies. We have to test everything. We have to try everything. If you were gravely ill and you went to the doctor and they said, well, you know, I've just got this experimental medicine, I don't know, but if you don't take it, you know, the likelihood is you're going to die, you would likely take it. But if you don't know you're that sick, you definitely aren't going to take it, right? Why would you take a potentially unknown path if you thought you were healthy? Well, we're not healthy. This is like emergency medicine for the planet. We can do it. And Iceland is really well poised to be a leader in reducing, removing, and repairing the environment. And we look forward to working with all of you to advance that agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. It's always so nice when a person who is literally changing the world passes by my boat. Now, let's get going. Here, I find myself tested like never before. The sea challenges my very existence. All of our existence. My next visitor is making waves in the world of ocean technology. He is an advocate and the catalyst for change. Antonius, are you ready? Let's give him a warm applause.
Thank you. Is this working? Hi. Is this working? Good morning. My name is Antonius Gagern, and I'm with a philanthropic foundation called Additional Ventures. And 18 months ago, we launched a big research and development program focused on one removal technology called ocean alkalinity enhancement. And I wanted to share a little bit about that journey and how it relates to Iceland. So, similar to Brad, I spent most of my career thinking about ways how to protect the ocean from our species, be it overfishing or pollution or tourism. And my work really focused largely on the tropics, where economically disadvantaged communities rely on the health of the ocean for their livelihoods every single day. And I worked with fishing communities and local and national governments, with impact investors, development banks, to nudge and pull and push and shape so that a sector like fisheries can thrive without harming the environment. But working on fisheries or habitat protection, as Brad was saying, is a real uphill battle. And it has become more and more difficult to ignore the big elephant in the room, which is CO2. Climate change today is the biggest and fastest growing threat to the ocean. And focusing merely on marine protected areas and trawl bans, for example, has started to feel, at least to me, a little bit like recommending physiotherapy to a cancer patient. And so 5 years ago, I was asked by a philanthropic foundation in the US to look into the question whether the ocean could be part of the solution to climate change and not only a victim. Specifically, I was asked to look into ocean-based carbon dioxide removal. And I thought, what a stupid idea, because the ocean is already suffering from acidification. Why on earth would we want to put more acid, more of the CO2 into the ocean? But I started doing the research and got so absolutely fascinated by the topic that I dropped everything I was doing and haven't focused on anything else but this question ever since. The question being, are there ways for us to accelerate the existing carbon pumps of the ocean to remove CO2 from the atmosphere? And there are two such pumps. The first one is biology. The second one is abiotic. So when you grow plants in the ocean, or when plants grow in the ocean, they absorb CO2 from seawater. And while much of this biomass eventually gets recycled back and CO2 released to the atmosphere, some of it actually makes it into the deep layers of the ocean where it is sequestered for tens to hundreds of years. The other one, the abiotic one, works a little differently. When wind and rain over time disintegrate rock on land and wash it into the ocean, the pH of the ocean increases a little bit. It becomes more basic and less acidic. And when that happens, the CO2 in seawater is transformed into a very long-lived form of dissolved carbon called carbonate and bicarbonate. So in that way, you're locking CO2 away for tens to hundreds of thousands of years. Both of these pumps, the biological one and the abiotic one, can be accelerated. So you can grow more plants in the ocean and deliberately sink it to the ocean floor. Or you can artificially increase the alkalinity of the ocean, either by adding rock dust to the ocean or by removing acid from seawater through a process called electrochemistry. Interestingly, 5 years ago, nobody was working on those questions, this urgency for carbon dioxide removal hadn't really hit the ocean research community, ocean industry. And so I spent a few years building out the portfolios of philanthropic organizations in the US on grant making to fund a little bit of the science, increase the scientific consensus in the field. That's also when I ran into Brad years ago, talking about this when it all started. But this work quite radically changed for me 18 months ago when I joined Additional Ventures, which is a foundation run by Mike Schröpfer, who used to be the CTO at Facebook, and doesn't shy away from tough problems. And a couple of weeks into my joining, we asked the question, well, what are currently the most promising ocean CDR solutions, and what do they need to mature at the moment? And so we basically said the most promising solution right now is ocean alkalinity enhancement, because it is basically unlimited in its scalability. It locks CO2 away for tens to hundreds of thousands of years, and it could theoretically be done for less than $100 per ton. And what it misses at the moment are two things. One is there are open questions about safety and efficacy of that approach, and it has to be de-risked as quickly as possible. The second one, which has been mentioned before, is neither the markets nor the regulatory environment is ready for these kinds of approaches. And so we have to create the enabling environment for a safe and efficient and responsible sector. So this conversation led to a program that I'm now running, which is called the Carbon to Sea Initiative, which seeks to understand whether OAE, ocean alkalinity enhancement, and under which conditions it is a safe and scalable mechanism for CO2 removal, and then to build a responsible sector based on the findings. It is a program that is now funded by 9 philanthropic foundations in the US, in Canada, and in Europe. We're working with approximately 100 scientists and engineers and partners around the world. And the program is currently capitalized with approximately $50 million. And so what we're doing are 5 things. One is really trying to get the science right. Second is to provide the proof of concept technologies for ocean alkalinity enhancement to be a safe and scalable solution. The third one is to build field research sites around the world where researchers can really focus on what they do best, which is research, and not struggle with the permitting and the logistics and the infrastructure challenges that come with this research. The fourth one is policy campaigns to increase the funding, the public funding into that space, because it is not millions but billions of research funding that we require for approaches like that. And the fifth one is to build the community of ocean alkalinity practitioners, bring them together, make them work and coordinate in the best way possible. And so let me spend the last minute to just tie it back to Iceland. As we were building out field research sites around the world, we were looking for partners who can deliver against this. It's an incredibly complex and ambitious endeavor because it hasn't been done before. There's no precedent. Every step is uncharted territory. And so a year ago, I was introduced to Transition Labs in Iceland, and I have to figure out who introduced me, because I have to send them a big chocolate cake or something, because that was a really a game changer for us, because Transition Labs not only opened the door for us to anyone we wanted to talk to, from academics to mayors, to law firms and engineering firms and regulators, but also has managed every workflow, every grant, every contract that we've made, and without them it would have been impossible to get so far as we have here in Iceland so far. And while we're still very much in a scoping phase, we're getting closer to identifying a few sites in Iceland where this research could actually happen. And when we're getting closer, we're going to engage with the communities around Iceland to understand under which conditions they would be actually supportive of this research. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you Transition Labs for the support.
That song always gets me. Now, let's welcome our next visitor, Grant. Come join us.
Hey guys. Thank you. Thank you to the singers and everyone for having us. I think if you read the conference title for this talk, you probably thought, proteins, incredible machines. That sounds scary. Am I eating proteins that are machines every day? And that was a thought that I first had when I learned about what proteins were capable of. And I want to walk you through at least my journey with protein and how we think about protein in society, because for me, it was really an eye-opening experience to realize how, as someone who doesn't have a PhD in microbiology, I could start talking about proteins after about 4 to 5 years working with them. So, Grant, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fabric Nano. This is a company that's been around for 5 years. We have about 30 employees working in London. We're deep tech, climate tech, symbio. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of R&D. And so let me start walking you through it. We have some slides. Are they on that side? There you go. So essentially, to me, proteins are always and will always be magical. They are an incredible thing. They are machines. Now, instead of staying in the fluff for too long and talking about my favorite quote of all time, I'm going to go straight to the practical. We want to engineer around these incredible machines. We want to think about engineering and practical applications for proteins as they can be used as machinery. And what I would like to do is I would like to go through one of the canonical examples that people use in biology all the time. And so that's an expression that goes like this. DNA makes RNA makes protein. And that's all we really learn about biology if you're in primary school like I was learning about biology. And it stops there. And I want to ask, what does protein do? And a lot of people don't know exactly what protein does. They think, I eat protein. Protein is in my food, and that's great. But protein makes chemicals. Protein makes all the chemicals we need. It can make every single chemical we need. And those chemicals get turned into materials. And those materials are all the things we know we need to live in a more sustainable way with the environment. And so I just want to look at all of these different materials here and think, is protein capable of making chemicals that are then made into these materials? And the answer is yes, 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 yes. We can use protein to make all of these different chemicals. And if you stop and you think, what does the world need to do to be sustainable? Well, it needs to have both materials and energy. And I think a huge important thing for us to learn about is how we could be making materials in a more sustainable way. And if you look at this image, and I know it's quite small, these presentation slides, here you're looking at a forest, and you're looking at a gorilla, and you're looking at a shell. And I'm just trying to give you an idea of the range of the types of chemicals we can make with proteins. We can make every single piece of that forest. We can make the green leaves. We can make the wood. We can make the bark. It's all because proteins are expressed in those living systems. And we can make the hair on the gorilla's head. That's a very different material, but we can make it using protein inside of that living organism. And we can even make the hardness and the rigidity of a seashell. And so I ask, if proteins are this incredible as machinery, if they are the operating system for the material world, well then, what do we know about them? And in 2020, 2021, AlphaFold, a DeepMind project, comes along, and it shows us that we can predict what these proteins look like. We can look at billions and billions of these proteins, and we can understand them. We can look at their structure, and we can say, that can make this chemical. I can generate a brand new protein that can make this chemical. And so if we have this operating system, if we have this thing that can give us all these biological chemicals and these biological materials, I'm a technology optimist. Why don't we have this in the world today? Can we make proteins at scale? Yes, we can. I mean, we can run reactors that have yeast or E. coli in them, and we can produce protein en masse. Can we make enough of it? Yeah, we run them in these bioreactors that make beer. We have them all over the world. We can ferment protein, and we can make as much of it as we need. And what does it look like? It looks like the whey protein powder that you might have put into your shake this morning and be asking, should I have done that? It's pretty weird. Grant's telling me it's a machine. Yeah, but it looks like that. We see this every day, but we don't investigate whether or not these proteins can do something useful for the sustainability challenges that we have. And so where are we today? Where is this incredible operating system today? what can we make? Well, we can make one thing using protein today in an industrial reactor, and that is high fructose corn syrup. Not very motivational that we can make just fructose corn syrup out of this, but we today can take glucose and we can convert, is that the right chart? Yeah, no, that one. We can take glucose and we can make fructose. And so today we swivel that tiny bond at the top using a protein, and all of a sudden we make 15 billion kilograms of fructose. It's made using a protein in a reactor industrially every single day around the world. And what we're missing is we're not even capable of going from fructose to this thing called allulose. And I'm using that as an example because it's another single protein that can get us to that swivel there that's highlighted. And allulose is an actual healthy sugar. It's natural. It occurs in figs and maple syrup at very, very low quantities. But if you create allulose en masse, you can make it into candy bars. You can make it into all these different things because it's very similar to fructose, but it has a negative glycemic index, meaning it is the diabetic's healthy sugar. It would solve obesity. And why don't we have this? Why don't we have a protein that can go from fructose to allulose? Well, here I'm showing you what happens when we try to use this incredible machine in a reactor. In about 2 days, the protein that takes us from fructose to allulose as a chemical, it dies completely. And if you think about protein as a machine, if you think about these proteins as these metal gears, it's not in the right environment. So proteins don't like to be used in industrial reactors. They're not very good at it. That's why we have only one example of it that's used internationally as an actual industrial process. And so what we're trying to accomplish at Fabric Nano is we're capable of taking that protein to make allulose, this healthy sugar, and we're capable of running that thing in a reactor without it dropping in its activity whatsoever over the course of at least a week. I'm showing you 2 days here, but we've run this thing for at least a week in our labs. And what we think is holding back this whole system, this operating system from making sustainable materials, is the fact that we don't treat protein as machinery, and we don't look at the environment in which those machines are used. If you leave these cogs or this kind of machine out in the wild, of course the cogs will rust. If you treat it with the right environment, the machine operates for a very long time. And so I just want us to think about how incredible this could be. Every single material that we have, every single thing that we want to make, we could be making with protein if we just understood how to use it in these reactors. I've got a lot of ideas of things I'd like to see. I'd like to see bio-based plastics. I'd love to see biofuels. I'd love to see all the materials we use in clothing, like nylons and things like that. And at Fabric Nano, we've played around with all those different systems. And we're capable of stabilizing protein to make all of those different chemicals. And so in the future, what we're planning on working on at Fabric Nano is this problem. We work on healthy sugars, we work on versions of plastic, but I love this statistic, which is that we've created over 8 billion tons of waste for 8 billion people on this planet today. And that's just going to go up and up and up and exponentially increase. And so if you look at 1 ton of plastic waste per person, we need to solve that issue. And the only way that I can think of to solve that issue, the use of materials by humanity, which is of course something we will always need to do, is to start engaging with the operating system of nature, the operating system that is fundamentally making all these materials, and that is the protein. At Fabric Nano, what we do is we're creating a sustainable future, and it's powered by protein. Most people don't know protein can even do this. Our systems are extremely scalable. We take a protein and we put it on what looks like an industrial bead that sits in a reactor. It's that simple. That's the environment. That's what makes it safe. And we screen for that. We use lots of really cool techniques. But we're really excited because over the next year, we're going to be taking this technology out of the lab and into some industrial applications. And I'm really happy to share this vision with you, and I'm happy that we could talk through some of the technology of Fabric Nano. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Grant. Now, talking about all this plastic, let's clean up, boys. Skulle man få henne? Ja. Ja. Imagine this. You're standing on the deck of a boat, surrounded by the ocean. The sun shines brightly and the sky is clear. The air carrying a hint of salt and the promise of adventure. As far as the eye can see, the ocean surrounds you in all directions. No better way to welcome my next visitors discussing policymaking across the Atlantic. Please welcome Henry, Lucy, Smári, and Lauren. The stage is yours.
Hi everyone. They warned me ahead of time that I would have to sit in this chair, so bear with me. I didn't get a chance to try it. It's about as comfortable as it looks. So I have an amazing panel here today, and we're going to have a conversation about the power of government and policy to help us address climate change. But maybe as a quick word of introduction, I'm Henry McLaughlin. I'm with Transition. And for several years now, I've been working on the intersection of investment, technology, and government policy. And I think one thing that's come to mind over the years is how to raise awareness around climate, we had to essentially scare people into realizing how this was the challenge of our lifetimes and of our generation. And when you're scared, you usually have a couple of reactions. You freeze, you panic, you try to ignore the problem potentially. But it's a powerful tool to raise awareness. Now we're in a new phase. We're in a phase where we don't so much need people to panic or freeze, but we need them to work together on difficult problems to actually take action and solve climate change in our time. And I think that's where the tech world and the investment world meets with government, because when you meet with policymakers, and we have two of them on the panel today, they often say, we need stories, we need narratives to get people on board and to get people optimistic about how do we address this together. And I think the stories of entrepreneurs, like the ones we've heard this morning, are incredibly powerful, so that policymakers can then go to their constituents and say, hey, it's not all gloom and doom. We have a solution, we can work together, and we can be successful in addressing it. So I'd like to turn to the panelists now, and maybe my first question will be for you, Ambassador. The US, I think, has announced that they would decarbonize the US economy by 52% by 2030, with many trillions of dollars helping to achieve that goal. I believe the European Union goal is 55%, though from a different baseline. So there seems to be a bit of a race going on both sides of the Atlantic, and we're pretty much in the middle of the Atlantic, so it's a good place to have this conversation. So my question to you is this a friendly competition? And of course, who's going to win?
No, I think that this isn't a race, really. And if you look at the big picture, as ultimately we have to do, we want the same things. We might have a slightly different benchmark, slightly different matrix, slightly different approaches to the aspects of our policy making, but we ultimately want the same things. On the side of the EU, which I represent here in Iceland, what we want are ultimately three things. We want Europe to become a climate neutral continent by 2050. But like you said, we also want to look at the bright side, so we want to convert and transform the challenges of climate change as much as we can into opportunities to improve and change our economies for the better, offer better jobs, offer better education. But thirdly, we also want to make sure that the green transition that is taking place is inclusive and that it's just. Because obviously you can imagine that there are industries and sectors and geographical regions which are finding it more difficult to get on board with green transition for various reasons. And we want to make sure that they get the help that they need to be on board. When we talk about the things that we want to do, we also have to take stock of where we are, and I think that it's important to underline that we've already come a pretty long way. So in the last 3 decades, we have managed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30%, which is very significant. We managed to put a price on carbon through the ETS scheme, which makes sure that it's the polluters who pays. We've managed to transform our energy sector profoundly, and if you now look at the data, you'll actually see that more electricity is being produced in Europe from wind and from solar than from gas and other resources. So again, a lot has been achieved already, but looking ahead at the stuff that we can do and how do we do it, our main toolbox is with norm setting, and it's with legislation, which I know is not the most sexy topic in a setting like this to talk about, but it's ultimately creating the environment that enables all these fantastic ideas and projects and entrepreneurs to do their bit and to do what they're best at. So if you look at the last package of legislation that we have on the table, it really includes everything. How we construct and build, how we produce food, sustainable energy, sustainable transport, all of that is here. And the other important aspect is to put our money where our mouth is. So if you look at the EU budget for the next 7 years, 30% of it is in one way or another related to climate, which is a really important statement of intent. But I would just maybe finish up this particular response by saying that even if Europe becomes an A-star student, we really can't transform the world on our own. If you look at the data, the EU now produces something in the region of 7% of the global CO2 emissions. So we have to work with others as well, and we're doing that through gentle diplomatic persuasion, but also very hard and concrete policy tools, whether it comes to making sure that we have sustainability weaved into all of our trade agreements, to, for instance, providing development funding for sustainable projects in Africa, in Latin America, in the Western Balkans, and all around the world.
Thank you. And I want to turn to Smari because you're our Icelandic representative here on the panel. So I want to get the Icelandic perspective on the transatlantic race towards climate action. But before I get there, yesterday I was attending a dinner, and the stereotype that everyone in Iceland knows everyone else in Iceland was confirmed, because I learned a few things about you. And so, of course, some of them are easy to look up. So you're a former MP. You're part of the Pirate Party, which hopefully helped with the dress codes today. By the way, we were all told that we were supposed to dress as if we were going on a boat, and you can tell we have like slightly different interpretations of what kind of boat that is. But so you're a former MP, you're now working with complicated science data sets, trying to address climate from that angle. I also learned that you spent times in war zones like Afghanistan, and that you occasionally fly your own glider, which I thought was an interesting data point.
I like flying.
So maybe taking all that together with these data sets that you're working on, like what are you seeing that's freaking you out, or what are you seeing that's like hopeful?
Okay, so there's a lot of things. One of the reasons I decided to move on from politics was I had talked with policymakers both here in Iceland, across Europe, across the United States, all the way up to the top echelons of the UN, and one of the things that always freaked me out was the degree to which decisions were being made without a very good concrete information backing. The data exists, it's existed for decades, but turns out it's really, really difficult to work with. And as a result, policymakers, but turns out also companies around the world, are making really bad decisions because it's so hard to work with the data. You can't take 2 weeks to set up an experiment to try some hypothesis if you need to take a decision now. So that's one of the things I wanted to work on. But the other thing is, we have seen a lot of focus on CO2. And CO2 is a fantastic metric of the scale of the problem. And what was being said here earlier about like the effect on the oceans and the large-scale effects of CO2, absolutely correct. But I feel like there's often a bit of a systemic approach missing, because CO2 is not a good metric of the quality of the solutions. There's a lot of things happening, such as desertification. We're seeing 120,000 square kilometers per year of desertification globally. That's about 1 Iceland or 3 Belgiums, depending on how you want to count. And that's a lot. We can't lose 3 Belgiums a year for many years before we have a real problem on our hands. Most people don't even know that the largest desert in Europe is in Poland, right? Which is, I think that's mind-blowing. It's actually a naturally occurring one. But these deserts all over the place are growing in every continent, and we need to do something about that. The other thing is, half of Earth's lakes are in a state of eutrophication. And that's something that you don't fix just by changing CO2 or emissions policy. You need to change agriculture at a fundamental level to fix that. So what I worry about is that people are hyper-focusing on the simple narratives at the expense of talking about the big picture. And sometimes, sometimes that's okay. We do need to worry about the CO2. That is one of the big pillars. I liked the model earlier of reduce and recapture and then repair. Because that's it. But we haven't been doing enough of the repairing yet. So maybe the last thing is, humans have demonstrated the ability to change the operational parameters of the planet. We have not yet demonstrated the ability to do so intentionally. And if we manage to do so intentionally, that means that we have gained control over the planet, which opens the biggest political problem in human history, which is who gets to decide what those parameters should be. And that's something I would like to start looking at more, is not just how are we going to fix climate change, but what do we do the day after we win? I think we can win.
I want to jump off something you just said and turn to Laura. So in the US, I know you've dedicated a big part of your life to try to repair climate and address climate change, to use that repair phrase you used and that was used by a speaker beforehand. But in the US, we first had to repair our own democracy before we had a chance to do anything significant on climate. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences of working on climate in the US when it wasn't a popular thing, and hopefully what you're seeing over the past 18 months and where it gives you hope?
Okay, small question. Well, first of all, I would say I do think there's competition. I think it's healthy competition. I think the most overt sector of that race is in the startup sector. I also would say that it's a mistake, as much as I'm seduced by technology and want to support it and radical scaling of good tech, to be expecting a magic bullet. It really is all hands on deck. And perhaps the most single powerful mechanism is low tech, like regenerative agriculture, like planting grasses and seaweed and things that can really happen at massive scale, algae farms that are then paired with AI. But in terms of the US, I think that Europe has done by far a better job as a global region in public awareness and understanding. The U.S., as a lifelong environmentalist, it's been a lonely battle out there of frankly, a very specific demographic up until now, and we are catching up. So we may finally be putting the trillions of dollars in, and I hope that we make big progress. I think the real big progress will be in the adjustment of the global supply chain. That has only, frankly, been possible because of the pandemic. And I also think that it is time for all of us, certainly on this stage, to engage in some radical honesty about the metrics. We can talk about what my country does in outputs, but I guarantee you, if you look very closely, we are stepping away from where the raw materials are, where the goods and services that we're bringing into our country, our furniture, our things like that's not part of our carbon emissions number, and so it's a disingenuous number. We need to be radically honest, and we're getting there. Things like the Earth observation data is allowing transparency, and it is a step in the right direction. Also, frankly, piercing the bubble of the carbon offset, stuff that's taken a lot of of the air out of the room, right? Oxygen out of the conversation. It's wasted a lot of time in hoping that that would be a solution, or a complete solution. So I think we're at a place where there's the tectonic shift has happened, that the big players, including regulatory moves, and as you and I were discussing before, the fact that the US Department of Defense has come out that climate is the #1 concern of global stability and a threat to the United States is helpful, right? Because it represents a huge amount of resources and momentum that are at least looking at a portion, a must needs be addressed portion, and that is in collaboration with areas, all kinds of areas of the world, like Europe.
If we can use some of the defense budgets to address climate change, we might be on the right track.
Well, yeah.
Actually, this leads me to something you just mentioned, which is this idea of the imports and how you account for that. And I think you pointed to that as well when you mentioned the carbon emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions that are attributable to the European Union, which are about 7%. But then if you include all the imports and all the economic activity that's tied to other parts of the world, the number increases rapidly, and that's also true in the US. Could you tell us a bit more about the carbon tariff, the carbon border tax, and how big of a tool do you think that is? And is there a hope of maybe having a transatlantic approach to that tax so that essentially, through collaboration, we can set a rule that the rest of the world hopefully chooses to follow as well?
Yeah. So what we have decided to do, well, in the EU, we love a good abbreviation, so it's the CBAM, Cross-Border Adjustment Mechanism, is basically a levy on products from carbon-intensive industries coming into the EU from parts of the world with standards of environment protection which are lower than those that we have. We are looking primarily at some of the most polluting industries. So you're talking about steel, aluminium, concrete, fertilizers. It's still in its infancy, so we have just actually last week adopted the legal text, which will come into force on a transitional basis in October of this year. But what it does is basically removes the incentive for European companies to try and be clever and outsmart the system and say, hey, I don't want to pay for ETS within the EU, so why don't I import something cheaply from country XYZ where the standards are less exacting. So the CBAM will hopefully help us in this direction. And you asked about the importance of the tool. It's massive. Our biggest leverage is the fact that we are a single market of close to 450 million consumers. So that gives you some negotiating power.
And very quickly, Smar, I wanted to turn to you. So Iceland, you're in this kind of unique position, sort of equidistant to the North America and Europe, pretty much, and also very connected to both sides. But climate action is not a spectator sport. So I assume from what we've heard this morning that Iceland is taking action. What's your take on where Iceland is today in terms of climate ambition?
Yeah, so the government has said 55% reduction by 2030, and I love the ambition. It's a good goal, it really is. It's not enough, and there's a lot of things that could be done better. Of course, we're taking cues from both Europe and the US, and there's a lot of things we can learn. But if we look at the policies as implemented so far, the report from admitted last year was that it's about we're likely to have 28% reduction by 2030, which isn't enough. And to put percentages into context, we're only talking 55% reduction is about 1 million tons of CO2 a year. Look, if we can't do that, how can we expect any other country to do that, right? I think the ambition is there, but I'm not going to lie, this is tough. It's really difficult to come up with good policies and good technologies and good methods of fixing such a big problem. So, I have a lot of sympathy for it, but we really have to do a whole lot better if we're going to win.
So I see the clock is ticking, so I want to ask you each a final question, but you can only answer in 5 words or fewer. So what is your, you know the concept of make-a-wish. So what is your dream climate policy make-a-wish? 5 words or fewer. Do you want to start?
Perfect is the enemy of good. Just start by starting.
Start by starting. Okay. Lucy?
Well, my wish is that we succeed.
That we succeed. All right, Smari?
Start managing the planet.
Start managing the planet.
I think I have a word left, but
You can say that one for later. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here today.
job has many layers. The most important one is to ensure the safety of my passengers. Now, I can see that there's a storm incoming, and I need a little bit of time to prepare the boat before we go underwater. So I propose that you landlubbers leave the area for about 20 minutes and get to know each other. If you run out of topics, you can always discuss the weather. That's what we mostly do here in Iceland. And I'll see you back here on time in 20 minutes.